Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Climbing Sycamores podcast, where we look at today's topics to get a better view of Christianity. I'm Annie Beege, and I'm joined by my friends Ben Sadler and Matt Harbach. Welcome. We're on.
All right. Well,
Here to complain about the youth today.
Aw.
This younger generation, they don't know what we had to go through.
Oh, can it, Matt?
you're part of the problem.
Thank you.
Well, I have a host of different ideas that are rolling around in my head, and I think I'm just here to ask my friends here what they think about it. And most of it, this is the time of the year when I'm starting to think about what are we going to do for our middle school ministry next fall and our high school ministries, and what do middle schoolers and high schoolers need? I know it's graduation for most middle schoolers and high schoolers, but it's time to start thinking about what's next. And the thought that keeps rolling around in my head is we do need to teach them spiritual truths. That's really, really important. And so how do we need to do that? But there are other parts of these young people's lives that are clouding out their spiritual life. They just don't seem to be resilient physically, emotionally, mentally. And so are there things that we can do as a church to help our young people become more resilient so that, when they face so many challenges, which they will, they're able to face them, let them roll with the challenges. Paul talks about how suffering produces perseverance, and perseverance, character, and character, hope, and hope does not disappoint us. That's how the Bible talks about it. I was also thinking about Ephesians, where the Bible talks about the goal of the Christian life is, to be spiritually mature. And it says in Ephesians 4, then we'll be no longer infants, tossed back and forth by the waves and blown here and there by every wind of teaching and by the cunning and craftiness of men and their deceitful scheming. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up into him who is the head, that is Christ. From him the whole body is joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. So that gives this picture of a Christian church of spiritually mature and growing people who are not thrown around by every idea that comes into the world, every challenge that comes in the world. They're not tossed around, but they're able to stand strong. Jesus talks about this: when you build your life on his words and his teaching, you're like building your life on a rock. So that when the storms of life come, it's at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, the rain comes and the wind blows, you will be able to stand. And I've also been thinking about this because a book that I read called Bad Therapy by Abigail Shrier, and she's been on a lot of different podcasts. And I don't know if I would agree with everything that she has to say, but here are some quotes from a recent interview. She says, we've never had a generation more focused on its feelings, and frankly, not one more tyrannized by their feelings. She says, we're telling kids that they aren't resilient, that their trauma is so important. No, actually, the story of human beings, of humanity, is loss, privation, suffering, and resilience, and overcoming it. So she talks, she says, kids' emotional pain is always front and center. It's always magnified. It's always magnified by their parents since they were little, and now they show up at work, and all they are is feeling pain all day long. Says this generation is flooded with what I call bad therapy. They're swimming in a language of psychopathology, and it's making them sick. So she talks about how, because there's such a heavy focus on being happy all the time, like the kids have to be happy, that they have to feel happy all the time. Sometimes she says, sometimes they just need to hear, yeah, it's tough, and you can do this. It's going to be tough, but you can do this. And she's advocating for more of a grow up to be mature, more strong, emotionally strong, more resilient, so you can take on more of life, not so that more of life is feels so intimidating. So those are all these different ideas that are rolling in my head. And so I'm kind of wondering, what do you think our young people need before they launch into college and beyond? And can the church help them with that? And so if you want to respond to some of Abigail Schreier's comments or any of those things. What do you think?
Well, I have a response because we talk about this kind of thing all the time, and it's like it feels like we always say, like, you want to take people's trauma really seriously,
Yeah.
and like we should open up about that and come up with kind of a game plan for how to work through that. And it seems like we do emphasize talking about it all the time. So I don't know, where do you draw the line? How do you give someone what they need but not more?
I think trauma is a really hard word too, because it has been used so much, and we've used it. And it's kind of like one of those things when you use a word so often, it can lose its meaning. You know, there's such a thing as, although this could be a whole podcast topic, John MacArthur, he's now almost a senile pastor out in California. He's really kind of hard-nosed. Whatever he says is straight from God's word kind of thing. And he just was quoted on stage for saying, there's no such thing as depression. There's no such thing as OCD. There's no such thing as PTSD. I don't know if you saw, so you have that one extreme on that side where, you know, if people would just read their Bible enough, they wouldn't have any of these problems.
Oh, is that his point?
Yeah, he says this is all basically made up, and it's because we don't.
That's ignoring science completely.
Right.
Completely.
Yeah, so that's one extreme, right? Then I think the other extreme is where, you know, you're pathologizing everything, that everything is trauma, you know, that you had a bad day was traumatic, that, you know, your teacher didn't give you an A in a paper or doesn't like you, that's traumatic. And then, you know, there's people, if you've had sexual abuse or something that, you know, one of these experiences in your life, and then you have flashbacks and all these really challenging things, like that's a whole nother level. That's something that shouldn't be minimized. And I think it also, what I'm learning is we can't play around with that either. I think sometimes we want to talk about it with people, or we think we're helping when we're talking about it. But if you open up that wound and you don't know how to treat it, you can do a lot more damage than good, I think. And if we're always trying to talk about it and everyone's trying to play therapist without any kind of training, everybody's trying to fix everybody else, I think that can be dangerous. Because they relive it. When you bring it back up, they relive it. And so now you're bringing it up. Are you trained to help somebody through that process? I think that's something that we need to talk about. And I think that's what she's kind of bringing up, Abigail Schreier, is that we're always bringing these things up. Well, we're keeping a lot of those things in the front of people's minds, always talking about it. And that's not always the healthiest way to deal with it. Now, you do have to talk about it, and I think there's a way to move through it and process it, but that's not what she's seeing.
So in relationship to maturity, what is a mature relationship with your emotions?
I think to be able to pay attention to them, you know, I think if you're totally oblivious and you just, a lot of times it just comes out as anger and you're just an angry
I'm in trouble.
I think that's not good. And, you know, we see this, like my wife's a second grade teacher, and, you know, I think sometimes, you know, kids just have a temper tantrum and it's because they didn't have breakfast, or, you know, something didn't go right at home. And that's how it comes out. So I think that's one immature way where you don't know why and you're spilling out on other people.
You don't have control.
Right. And then I think you're not connected to your emotions. Then I think there is I'm always thinking about my emotions, and I'm always obsessing about how I feel. And happiness is it's something that happens passively. You're not always going to be happy. And, you know, if you try to aim at happiness, or I have to always feel happy, and then something's wrong with me if I don't feel happy all the time, it's just one of those things you'll never grasp onto it if you're always searching for it. And so I think a healthier way, C.S. Lewis talks about self-forgetfulness. When you serve other people, happiness is like a byproduct, because you're not thinking about yourself at all. So I think that there's another kind of idea that I wanted to maybe bring up in connection with this, that, environmental things that are going on in our life that are leading us to be thinking more about ourselves and our emotions. I showed you guys a video I had to look at for school about a social influencer, and she wanted to become an influencer because she said this was going to make me more money than being in medicine that she was looking into. And the more she focused on product positioning, her own image, taking pictures of herself, videos of herself, the worse she felt, because she was always thinking about herself, always thinking about her emotions, always internally focused and isolated. And so I think those two extremes are not good. Either you're totally detached, you don't know why you're angry, and you don't know why you're doing the things you're doing, or you're so obsessed with becoming happy that you're miserable all the time because you're not happy.
So the maturity element then I think has to come with some grounding, and then you can't really have that without other people. Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yes. I mean, you think about like a mature, wise person, like in every movie you have a guide that's this kind of mature, wise person, right? You have Mr. Miyagi, or you have, I don't know, Gandalf, or you have these, and you're never talking about themselves. They're never like, oh, how am I doing? Or what do you think about me? Or is this all right? They're never self-reflective.
But they're self-possessed.
What do you mean?
Like they're self-assured.
Self-assured, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They're confident. Mm-hmm. So I think that confidence and courage, those virtues, are really important. That you know who you are, you know what you stand for, and you're okay with standing up for something, and you're living in service to others, and you're not asking for everybody to comment on you all the time. I think that's a mature person, and you're able to take on things.
What is it about with the social media or the social influencer or whatever she was? What is it about having all the attention on you and your own attention? Like, what is that? Is that just like, do you inherently kind of know that you're just not perfect, and so like you're just constantly?
I think it's perfectionism.
It's constantly like being thrown in your face, essentially, or like I mean, what is it? Why?
You're tying your identity to the comments section. Mm-hmm. That's how you're gauging yourself. Mm-hmm. And if you're like, so the more you do that, the more perfectionist you become. Mm-hmm. So I feel like you do that enough, and now at a certain point, even if 99 out of 100 comments are positive, right, that one's going to dig even harder.
Yeah, she talks about that in her video. Yeah. Yeah. That when she look at that, it would be obsessed with that. I also think there is a good thing about knowing you're doing a good job. There's something about being approved and accepted that's fundamental in who we are. We need to know that we're accepted and approved. But when you are always searching for that, and you don't know you already have that in Christ, and you have that because you're a human being, and you don't believe you have that because you've offered something of value to other people, and you're always searching for it, I think that's when it's like this endless hole.
Yes.
And we were just not made to look at ourselves that long and that much, and to think about ourselves that much. It makes us sick. And we were just never meant to be at the center of the universe. And I think it goes back to even Genesis 3, where God is at the center of Eden, and his tree is at the center of Eden. And when they ate from that tree, they were saying, I want to be at the center. I want to be God. And I think that's still something about how we are human nature. We think we want to be God. We think we want to be at the center. But anytime we're at the center, it makes us miserable because we're just not meant to be there. So I think that's a real temptation. And I think that there is that if you're around somebody, I think that's immaturity, who's always asking, how am I doing?
Right.
What do you think of me?
Right.
Look at me.
Yes.
And it's exhausting.
Yeah.
And so I think we want to help ourselves and younger people to say, go serve somebody, go help somebody else, do something for someone else to get your mind off yourself.
How do you do
important
that with a middle-aged person? No, and I'm not
Yeah.
even trying
Yeah.
to be funny. Like
I know.
it's, I mean, and it's not just one person. I'm thinking of a hand, and I'm not talking about myself, Matt. Don't go there. I'm just saying in general, because I do feel like I see a lot of people my age, 40-ish, who friends of mine, good friends of mine, even, who are just constantly seeking validation.
Yeah.
Constantly, like, just need assurance of
Yeah.
what they're doing. Am I doing the right thing? Like, and I think that's normal to a degree. Like, everybody has that, I think, to some degree, but it's a lot,
Right.
and I hear about it
Yes.
a lot, and I don't
Yeah.
mind being helpful, but I'm like, boy, you gotta
Yeah.
toughen up a bit here.
Yeah.
A lot of very sensitivity, and a lot of I feels even
Yeah.
at 40,
Right.
so, and I think it's just been like a movement. So it wasn't always like that, but something happened that made that a movement.
It's hard to make somebody change if they don't want to change. They have to make that decision. But I wonder if redirecting the conversation to others and to what they have to offer, and like emphasizing what they have to offer to other people, I think that can be helpful. But, and just maybe asking the question, what's making you feel so bad is not whether you're good enough, but just that you're thinking about yourself at all. And I don't know the best way to, it depends on the context or how you would say that, but
I would probably just say it. and I think I'm close enough to the people that I could just say it that way.
right. And,
Yeah.
and it's not whether they're good or bad, or whether they're good enough in these different areas. It's just that they're thinking about themselves at all.
So, okay, here's an interesting counterpoint, I think. So to me, when people say maturity, I've always equated that with like a level of responsibility.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's just, I think, because in my own life, and then I'm thinking of my little brother who used to be just a complete pain in the butt all the time. And I remember I went to college for a semester, and I came back at Christmas, and he was like a completely different person because he had gotten a job,
Yeah.
and it was something he liked.
Yeah.
But I'm like, other friends of mine too. I mean, I think it just curbs the impulsivity, and you say, no, I'm not going to stay up late on Saturday morning because I got to come in and be at church the next morning
Right.
to do work. and
Right.
I got to be sharp for that.
Right.
So you're putting off the temporary fun thing for something that's more important, and so to me, that's, I see that as a pattern where someone is just always acting childish, but when you put something in front of them, they care about, okay, I have to do this. That starts to just reorganize and direct everything in their life in a direction of that's positive.
Yep.
And so now you're saying that there are 40-year-olds but maybe these are two different things. I'm not sure.
It feels two different things to me.
Like because they have responsibilities, I'm assuming. But I don't know. Is it true that these things are somewhat connected? Like if you're an adult and you're a parent and you're full-time employed, like I feel like that strips away a lot of that.
I think it's helpful. I
Like,
think it
am I
makes
doing
you,
okay? Am I doing it? Like you don't have time to think
You
about
don't have
that,
time to
you know?
think about it.
right.
When you too
And
much
it's not
time is a
about you,
problem.
right? Because it's about
Yeah.
helping these kids or helping these
Being a
other.
good employee and
Right.
you doing your work.
So because that to me is an element of maturity, but there's also an emotional maturity that we're talking about too. And so what then are those completely separate?
Well, I wonder if the question, again, if you have these close relationships and you could just say, maybe it's not about you. Maybe it's about this person you're trying to help. Or maybe you need to start trying to help others. And maybe it's not about you at all, how well you're doing and how well you're analyzing, and I think it can be connected, because when your focus is on service towards others and a responsibility towards others, that's a whole nother ball game. Especially like in the parenting relationship. I mean, if you were spending, this does happen, unfortunately, but I think it shows how this is a unhealthy relationship. A parent should never ask their kids, how am I doing? In the sense of like, or I shouldn't say never, but like, do you like me?
Right.
That kind of
Right,
situation, because
right.
it's not about you.
No.
You are here to make sure they
Right.
grow up and can move out and can,
Right.
and you know, so I think that responsibility to them alleviates that immature kind of impulse of analyzing and I think it's really important. There's just too much stuff to get done. There's too many people to help. There's too much work to be done. I found, that like with our daughter, getting a job was really helpful for her and just taking on more responsibility. And as much as in the family, I am the pushover in the house and everybody knows it. And like, Dad, we love that you're the pushover. But letting them fail more and more, I think is as hard as it is, let them fail early on and feel those consequences, as much as I want to take them away and not let them feel the consequences, is so important for building that resiliency.
It is. And I mean, they even teach that like in the Love and Logic is for small children. It's like, let them fail while you still have, you can oversee it.
Yeah.
So that they learn, later on. So I think that's important too.
And I guess that's what I wanted to think about when it comes to middle school and high school ministry, is how much more responsibility can we give these kids to even lead the lesson, even lead the Sunday night or whatever we're going to do at Wednesday night worship. How much more responsibility for leading some discussion pieces, taking responsibility for their own health. All right, your parents are going to be there to put every piece of food in your mouth or that you exercise. Take some responsibility for yourself in some of these areas.
Solution to that is just grow up in a family with 6 kids.
Yeah.
The parents cannot be helicopter parents. There are too many children.
I do think that is a big change. Some families, I have a friend, I think she had 9 brothers and sisters. And then now she only has 2 children. And I think that was intentional.
That's
that
why.
was too much. But she was incredibly responsible because she had to. There was no time. And so I read this book, Bad Therapy, and she really does advocate for giving more responsibility to kids. And I mean, even tried the other day, went grocery shopping with Annie, our 6th grader, and Joan, our 8th grader, 12 and 14. And they're always telling me why they don't like the food I buy for lunches or whatever. And I said, all right, here's $25 each. You buy all the food that you want for the week, for your lunches.
Yeah.
And it was interesting. They're like, well, I was going to get the Fruity Pebbles, but I didn't have enough money left. So I got the yogurt and the cheese and the whatever. And so it's just little things like that I want them to see.
Yes.
I'm so glad my parents didn't do that.
Why not?
Ice cream sandwiches.
All week
No,
long.
but it's just about frugality, and like even that gets old. Ice cream sandwiches would get old too eventually.
Not
if
for
you have to make a
12-year-old.
decision, you decide that, you're going to still be hungry if
Right.
that's what you eat for lunch. And so letting them take on more and more, I think.
There was also something too that, and I can relate to this. They called us like kind of elder millennials / Gen Xers, like the latchkey kids, where like the parents were not home when you got home from school. They did not pick you up. You took the bus. You walked home.
Yeah.
You had a house key at the age of 8.
Yep.
You let yourself in.
Yep.
You hung out for a couple hours by yourself
Right.
until your parents came home, or you went outside to play with your friends,
That's what
and
we
it was
did.
just
Yep.
very like hands off.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if in turn, I mean, I guess, are we now, are people who
Swinging
experience
back.
that right now, are they helicoptering as a result of some, feeling that they had when they were little of being abandoned? Or, I mean, who knows? Like, I don't feel that way. I don't feel like I completely helicopter my kids. I think we're maybe hands off pretty much, but maybe more than we should be. I don't know.
I think that's important. I have a college classmate. I don't know if I would have let my kids do this, but he made his own raft and did like a Huckleberry Finn thing
No.
down the Mississippi River.
Well, maybe.
And
Maybe.
they went pretty far. I think I don't know how. They went through a few states and they did it.
Oh, wow.
And I think that's maybe another extreme, but I think we do need
Box
more
of
of
granola
that.
bars.
Yeah. In her
Jeez.
book, in this book, Bad Therapy, she talks, I think it's Japan, that intentionally has places of the playground for kids where the teachers cannot see, so that the kids have to figure out things on their own. And I thought that was another interesting thing where it's not everything is monitored.
Oh, we
Not
would never
every-
let that fly in this country.
I know.
Not a chance.
And not everything is parent or teacher led, that they have to figure out some of these rules of the game and social rules on their own. And if you're going to be a jerk, you're going to get kicked out of the group. No one's going to
Right.
want you around.
Right.
So,
Lord of the Flies.
yeah, that's right. Lord of the Flies.
in the
so-
back corner of the
In
playground
the
behind the
yeah,
fence.
the back corner of a playground.
And I don't know if I said this to you guys before we started, but my concern is I talked to some pastors who work at Christian colleges, and they've said every year the incoming freshmen are less and less capable for normal things, and they're in there for counseling all the time on, someone didn't ask me out, or someone dumped me, or I can't. I don't know how to do my laundry. I
Okay.
don't know how to take care of I don't know how to do normal bookkeeping things on their own finances, or keep a job, because they'd never had a job. They've never had to work. So they were concerned because, they're trying to counsel these kids, and there's some kids that have legitimate, things that they need to work through. And some of them, they're like, all right, you should have figured this out by now.
So why? So that's a parenting thing. So why do you think it is that parents? I know. So for me, sometimes too, it's like I feel like, okay, I can just do this. It's easier if I just do it.
Sure.
Matt's told me several times, just have your kids cook dinner once in a while, and we try. We did try it, but then it was like, well, I've got to nag them
Sure.
to pick something, and I just don't feel like fighting with them,
Yeah.
and so I guess, how did we end up in this situation where a college freshman doesn't know how to do their laundry?
Right.
I mean, I'm just like, how?
I think parents have done everything for them. Like,
But why? It's
getting-
not like we have any more time on our hands than, or is it
I think
just
it's led by fear. We know there's all these things that could go wrong out there now. And I think Abigail Schreier, she talked about that, where they could get in a car accident, and so we'll drive them everywhere.
oh no,
They could, working is hard. They're so busy. We don't want to, and her big thing is this mental health thing. Like, we always want kids to be happy, and so we don't want to put them through too many hard things. And so they don't have a job. They don't have a car because parents are taking them everywhere, and they are, parents are okay with kids staying home on their phone because, to go off unsupervised at some outing or whatever could potentially cause more problems.
okay,
And so there's another book, iGen. It was researched by Jennifer Tweedy, and she's talked about how adolescence is growing because kids are exposed to more adult information at an earlier age because they have access through YouTube or whatever. But they're putting off maturity. So their adolescent period now goes from 10 to 25, when in the past they would kind of learn about some of these things and experiment with some of these things at age 16, and then get the job and be out of the house at 18. And so I think what the prescription from some of these researchers would be, give your kids some money and tell them to go buy the groceries, or give the kid has to have a job if they want, and tell them they have to get their driver's license, and let them have more unsupervised teen or kid-led activities without you getting and monitoring everything. She spoke against, and I don't know if I'm ready to give this up yet. We use that Life 360 to kind of know where Shelby is driving or where they all
do
are.
you?
Yeah, and she says, stop monitoring your kids all the time. Let them figure it out. And I was like, oh, all right, something to think about. So she's really kind of pushing the kids need to take, they need to suffer to produce perseverance and character and hope. So
we do not monitor Tristan at all. But I've learned that he has not been completely honest about where he's been sometimes. And
then you have to pull it back a little bit.
Well, no,
Okay.
I don't necessarily, I want to encourage honesty and all that. And I tell him like, okay, you got caught up here. And it was nothing serious,
Right.
by the way. I think he just didn't want to, it's fine. Lying is not fine, but
yeah.
I guess what I'm saying is, while I don't condone lying, I do think it's a normal part of the
Teenage life.
Yeah, I do. Not good. Of course, we don't encourage it, but I do think there's something normal about it.
Yeah. I have one story about a relative of mine with this monitoring thing. So my cousin's son just got his driver's license, just turned 16, so a little while ago, maybe about a year ago. And so they were looking at all the information, like you're driving way over the speed limit, you're rolling through stop signs, and like we're going to have a talk-in. Both mom and dad were like, we're sitting you down and we need to talk about your driving habits. And they were really ticked off. And so they sit down, they show him the phone, they're giving him this big speech. And he's like, Dad, that's Mom's phone.
Whoops.
She's the one who's rolling through stop
Whoops.
signs and driving too fast. He's like, well, I was late for work. And
Whoops.
so sometimes that'll bite you. Yeah, my dad and mom, my dad always said, he's like, all right, I don't need to know everything, but if you ever get in trouble, you can call me,
Yes.
and no questions asked, I'll come pick you up.
Yes.
And thankfully, I never had to pull that, card, but I always appreciate that, and I probably had too much freedom because they were busy. They both had jobs that one was working in Milwaukee, the other was working in Chicago, and we lived in Kenosha, and so they were just like, yeah, you figure it out. So I think that happened with a lot of kids in my generation, and like you said, latchkey, and I think there is the swing the other way of the helicopter or snowplow or whatever you want to call it, not letting kids suffer at any level. And this author is saying, this researcher journalist is saying, this is making our kids sick. Because why is there such a high level of anxiety? Why is there so much depression? And she would point to a lot of it, she would say, is because everything seems overwhelming, because they don't feel like they have any control, any skills. They can't handle anything because they've never had to.
But we're being told that as parents also. So then
Right.
we kind of almost like, we get all these things, much like the kids thrown in the face about like, the anxiety and all this. And I think as parents, then we're on high, like vigilant, like looking for signs
Right.
of depression in our kids and like,
Right.
are you okay? And so I think they're getting it thrown in their faces. We as parents are getting it thrown in our faces. And then we're, on the lookout for it.
Yeah. In her book, she says that some of the psychologists that she says there's good therapists out there, good psychologists, and the ones that she really supports are the ones who won't do child therapy. They'll only do parent therapy, or with the parent in the room, because she says what can happen is if the teen and the child is going to therapy without the parent, it's giving the impression that my parents can't handle life, that I need to go around them, that they don't know, they don't have the answers. And that creates, she says, more anxiety. And so if a parent is going to therapy, they can kind of, all right, there's some things that I probably should tone down at home, that I don't need to be bringing all this stuff. And a good therapist or coach could do that. So I think that could be helpful, because you're right. We're getting all this stuff all the time. So you're always on the lookout. And some of it, I think it is giving the kids more responsibility and
Or even
more
just
sense of control.
The sermon series that we just did about the 7 primal questions.
Yeah.
I'm like, I wish, I was able to identify what I believe my children's primal questions are.
Okay.
And so I kind of wish that I would have had this earlier,
Sure.
so that I would, know a little bit better. And I even went to, I said to Tristan, I go, I think this is your primal question. And I I wish I would have known it earlier, because I think I would have done things. I would have acted a little different, and it would have made more sense to me who you are
And what makes you
and
tick.
what makes you tick. And I
Yeah.
just, and I wish I just would have known it sooner.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that like we could do maybe for parents, or like
Yeah,
assessing the
that's
kids
good.
and saying like, this is, how you might parent a child whose motivation is this or primal question is that.
That's interesting. That's really good. I think that can be hard, because how early would you have known, do you think? If you knew this, how early could you have detected
I agree.
that?
I don't know. Because don't they even tell you shouldn't really give kids
Yeah.
like a personality test or strength
Yeah.
finders until they're X
high school
years
at
old.
least, yeah.
Right. And so it's kind of like, well, maybe it's too late, but
I think to be aware that they probably have lots of those questions and to try to answer as many of them as you can. But yeah, I don't know. There is something when you give a kid more responsibility. I really appreciate what you're doing, Matt and Annie. You guys are both involving young people in your music team and on your tech team. And I know for Jonah, he's like really proud of that he gets to serve and do some, I have this job and I have a responsibility. And like you said, that word responsibility, if we can give them more and more responsibility, I think unfortunately what happens is sports is really great, but because now you have to train all year round for your sport, they don't get some of those other experiences of other responsibilities. Now you have a responsibility to your team, but there are so many other responsibilities that you should be learning that go hang out with Grandpa for a while and learn from him what responsibility looks like. Learn some skills from family or extended friends or whatever. But there is this obsession that you have to do a sport all year round, and so that's what takes up all your time.
So they're missing out right. Mm-hmm.
That unstructured learning opportunity. So yeah. So I'm going to try to my idea right now for youth ministry is to bring in a speaker who's going to talk for 10 to 15 minutes on physical health. Ron Reuter, lead these kids on like some general physical fitness skills, and then have them do that night in small groups. Bring in a great teacher who's really specialized in one area, who can teach kids from all these different levels for 10 minutes on a certain topic that finances, on career, whatever it is, and connect it to their faith, and then have adults lead small groups through some of these different ideas and help them either act it out or practice it, or get them doing these things so that we can teach them skills. And I think that's what Boy Scouts were doing at one time. That was the idea of Boy Scouts or pioneers or whatever. And I think I'd like to transition our youth ministry to be more teaching these kids to be resilient so that they have confidence in what God has given them. So
I think that's wise. And I think there's always jokes about like, well, I learned calculus in high school, but I probably should have learned, how to write a resume, or, you know what I mean? Like just stuff like that.
Yes.
There's a lot of jokes about it, but like if a church group, youth group can provide, resume writing or nutrition.
There's some really successful business owners, like, all right, what did you need to hear when you were 15? And that would have really helped you get on this journey earlier. I think that's what I want to do. So hopefully we can get parents on board and get people on board. But I want kids to leave their middle school, high school years having heard from their pastor and their church that God has given them strengths and skills and abilities, and God is with them, and the world is not overwhelming.
It's empowering to them.
Yeah, give them that empowerment idea. So that's my idea.
That's good.
Good, Matt? You're deep in thought.
Never.
All right. Good?
I think we're good.
If you'd like to get a hold of us here at the Climbing Sycamores podcast, feel free to email bsadler@victoryofthelamb.com. BSADLER@victoryofthelamb.com. If you like today's intro music, it's been brought to you by Andrew Lynch's song, My Name, Hello.